here's something to ponder. Could a rich and/or intelligent wrestler get over as a face? Throughout the history of wrestling, I really can't think of any wrestler whose gimmick was that he was rich or that he was intelligent and was over as a good guy. When you think of rich wrestlers, you think of like Ted DiBiase, Alberto Del Rio, JBL. When you think of intelligent wrestlers, you think of guys like The Genius, Damien Sandow, Christopher Nowinski, David Otunga. All those guys are or were heels. So why are the rich, intelligent wrestlers always so hated? Well, I mean, it obviously goes back to our society and how a lot of people view the rich and the intelligent. They consider those people the elite, and the elite like to, rub their wealth or their intelligence or their status in people's faces, and it makes people feel bad. A lot of wrestling fans maybe didn't go to college. A lot of wrestling fans don't have a lot of money. So a lot of wrestling fans don't really connect with the rich or smart guys, or they flat out boo them because those wrestlers will usually flaunt their status in other people's faces. And therefore the smart, rich, asshole character has always gotten over as a bad guy, and it's worked very well as an archetype throughout all of wrestling history. There are very few exceptions to this rule. I mean, there's Xavier Woods, aka Consequences Creed. That guy's got like a PhD and a master's. He's a really smart guy, and the announcers do mention it on programming, but that's not really his gimmick. That's like a secondary thing that they'll say in passing about the guy. So it's not really, his intelligence is not really his gimmick. Del Rio was a good guy for a few months back in 2013, but that obviously didn't work out because he's back being a heel now. But I don't think that his failed face run had anything to do with his purported wealth and his gimmick. I think it had a lot to do with the fact that he was just really bland as a good guy. The only rich people who I can ever think of that got a positive reaction in wrestling were Donald Trump, and that's only because he literally made it rain money from the sky and gave it to the fans. And then there was Floyd Mayweather, who was such an underdog at WrestleMania 24 against the Big Show that people almost had no choice but to cheer him because he was such a plucky underdog in that situation. But I don't really count those two in the long run because they were just these temporary, they were part-time personalities. They weren't main fixtures like some of the more established wrestlers. So let's talk about that for a second. How could you make a rich guy beloved by the fans? Well, let's think about this in the real world. There are a lot of rich guys who people like. There are lots of rich guys with philanthropic sides. Guys like Warren Buffett, Bill Gates, Elon Musk. I mean, these guys, they contribute to their society. They give back a lot of the money they have earned. So, could you have a philanthropic wrestler be portrayed as a good guy, being rich and philanthropic? You could have vignettes of him showing him in his big house and obviously showing off his wealth, but he still goes and gives back to his community. He donates money to good causes. He volunteers in his community and helps the homeless and all these things like that. I can be your hero! At the same time, the more I think about it, the more I think that kind of vignette or that kind of gimmick would backfire because, even in today's PG era, we're not in the Attitude Era anymore, but even today, guys whose gimmicks are that they are so goody two-shoes, they're squeaky clean, the fans crap on that no matter what, whether it's intended to be a good guy like Rocky Maivia back in the late 90s, or Kurt Angle and Bo Dallas today obviously are heels, but there's a very tongue-in-cheek, like, I think I'm good, I think I'm virtuous, but people hate me for some reason. So I think that's almost how it would be responded to by the fans, so that might not be the best way to go about it. But even if these vignettes were taken seriously, odds are it's not that wrestler's house. It's not that wrestler's money that's being donated to these causes, if they're being donated at all. I mean, a gimmick like this would barely work on the national level and would definitely not work on the indie level because, let's face it, wrestlers don't make that much money, so it wouldn't be considered very realistic. Maybe after he beats a guy in the ring, instead of stuffing a dollar bill down his throat like Ted DiBiase did, he would just write a check to that wrestler's favorite charity. That's a pretty nice gesture, right? That could get him over. I think the only other way you could make a rich wrestler a good guy is pull a Donald Trump and just literally have him give money to people, Maybe after he wins a championship or after every successful title defense, he'll just, make it rain money from the sky or hand out stacks of cash to people in the first few rows because he's that awesome of a guy. But I mean, if you kept doing that, it would get mighty cost prohibitive. Okay, so that might not work, but what about intelligent wrestlers? You can be smart and you can be well liked, can't you? Those people exist. I guess the key is you have to be very humble about your intelligence. You couldn't, make a big deal out of it. You couldn't talk to other people about how much smarter you are than them because obviously that is a sign of you talking down to them. You could have a guy who just uses his wits to just verbally take down an opponent before every match, cuts a really intelligent, verbose promo and just bewilders and confuses the other guy and just plays with his head. But that's kind of been done before. I mean, The Rock always tore down people verbally with his promos before a match would ever begin, but he was never really booked as a smart guy. He was never booked as an intelligent, book-worthy wrestler, so I think that specific wrinkle might be a little too subtle for wrestling fans to pick up on. Or what if you had a comedic character, kind of like a science nerd, like Donatello from the Ninja Turtles, who would come up with these inventions and algorithms to create some kind of competitive advantage, or he has some computer program to figure out the best strategy to beat a wrestler, which, as I say it now, I realize the York Foundation did the exact same thing in WCW. But if you take it not so seriously and you make it some more kind of a comedic thing, it doesn't always have to succeed. And the wrestler I'm talking about doesn't have to be a main eventer, just a guy who can get over. It can be a comedic character. The science fiction nerd route is not a bad way to go. A lot of people I know who are into science fiction are intelligent people. And in the indies, I've seen a lot of wrestlers whose gimmicks are based around nerddom, or they have merch, or they have part of their gimmick that is inspired by some sort of science fiction-y kind of thing. I mean, that stuff gets over like gangbusters because people in that demographic, the people they're catering to, obviously align with it. They acknowledge it. They recognize it as something they like. So it's catering to the right crowd. And a lot of wrestling fans are like that. They're into the science fiction stuff. They're into the nerdy stuff. So why isn't there on the main stage this science fiction kind of nerd character? I think that can be done respectably, not like Jameson or something, with a little more, panache than that, and it'd still get over it, be respectable. I guess that in doing this thought exercise, what I've learned, with the exception of some very narrow angles to go about it, there's a reason that rich and/or intelligent wrestlers have always been bad guys. They've always been so one-dimensional and heelish. It's because those gimmicks are so easy to get across and they're just so naturally loathed. It's like the evil foreigner gimmick, You can't make a wrestler's intelligence or his wealth a central part of his gimmick. You can't make it the forefront of his gimmick because it's just too difficult. Society has made it too difficult to look beyond that and see people for being good guys in spite of those things. You can make it a secondary thing, like what they do with Xavier Woods, where they talk about, oh, he's a smart guy, but that's not what the main thing they talk about. If you make it the primary thing, then it's really hard to make it something that you can get behind as a good guy. But if you make it a secondary thing, you can work around that, but then that's not really his gimmick. If a rich or a smart wrestler were a good guy, the things he would have to do to impress the fans and get him over as a good guy would be so over the top and outlandish it would barely be a wrestling character anymore. You just could not take the guy seriously. They say nothing in wrestling is original anymore, but if some booker out there in this crazy big world of ours could successfully book a beloved $1 million man or genius character, I would love to see that. So what do you think? Do you think it's at all possible in any realm of the imagination for some obscenely wealthy or insanely intelligent guy to get over as a good guy, to make him beloved by the fans? Or do you think that our societal prejudices built up over the millennia have just made that too much of a barrier to overcome, too impossible to accomplish? Let me know in the comments or send me an email or a tweet. I'm Brian Zane, and I'll see you next time.
I come from money, I come from class.